SpaceX just announced a deal to acquire AI coding startup Cursor for $60 billion. But there's a catch. The decision on whether to actually follow through conveniently lands after SpaceX's IPO this summer. Musk may have just turned a $10 billion option into a $60 billion valuation story. And Wall Street's already pricing it in.
Well, yeah, we talked about that on a previous episode of rolling up XAI, SpaceX, right, to build more of an ecosystem. And Elon's great play is that this is all going to outer space, and it's somehow the narrative's forming around AI capabilities. So compute around XAI, right, and around, of course, using the supercomputer. I think that was a part of this story that Cursor would be able to use that because Cursor itself needs access to more compute, more and more compute to compete with the other coding agents out there. So this is just taking one of the big players off the market potentially because it's an option. And for people who are curious, the way that that works is essentially you're paying 10 billion for the right to potentially pay 60 billion total. Because that 10 billion is really a breakup fee if for some reason the partnership doesn't work out. But that's a hell of a breakup fee, right? And so again, we talked about optionality. This is a good example of it. Let's get them off the market in the time being, because I think they probably would have gone IPO either way. They go IPO, they're more expensive. So get them off the market now while they're raising 2 billion. And then you have the option, if the partnership goes well, if the integration plan makes sense, cultures clash, business models clash, then you can break up. People see that as an expensive breakup, but it's much more expensive to do the full transaction and do the integration going all the way to IPO. But I think what you're seeing is the building blocks for a more coherent narrative around AI, the space story, data centers, compute, coding, just creating a much broader ecosystem to compete.
I said this with space data centers. He's really good at increasing the value of a company. And I don't know that he's as good at increasing the underlying financials. And I think this, we talked about Allbirds last week, and I don't think this is as egregious as Allbirds by any stretch. But I do think it has some of those hallmarks of pumping the stock because he gets to get the value of acquiring that company just because of the way that this is structured and the timing of it. He gets to claim the value without actually having to purchase the company. So he's acquiring a $60 billion asset because any asset's worth what someone's going to pay for it at a given time. In this case, $60 billion. We have proof now that that company's worth $60 billion. It's going to wrap under SpaceX. It's going to make the valuation of SpaceX potentially go up by 60 billion. However, there's not been a deal struck for it. So I think it's a genius move by him from a stock inflation standpoint, or potential IPO offering standpoint. I think it's a genius move there. But let's look at the flip side of this coin. So Cursor is a company who potentially could have been a $100 billion company. For them to accept this offer now, looking down the barrel of Claude code or looking down the barrel of Codex from OpenAI, you have to kind of wonder, was there some writing on the wall for Cursor that made them accept this deal in the first place? So you got to wonder there, but a $60 billion or $10 billion payday is really hard to turn down. So who knows? And it does give them access to one of the biggest supercomputers out there at Colossus. I think it's called, is their Tennessee supercomputer. So I don't know. It's a really interesting deal. It's very structured favorably for Elon and SpaceX and their IPO offering. So I don't know. I always have a negative slant towards Elon, but he does do some pretty smart stuff.
Well, think about it from Cursor's perspective. You're raising 2 billion. Compare that to how much Anthropic and OpenAI are able to raise. So if you attach your name to the quintessential capital raiser on the planet, you're going to be able to actually compete. And they have apparently a good product. They've gone from a couple hundred million in revenue to 2 billion, I believe, annual recurring revenue in just like a year. The difference between that and the rest of those companies it's attaching itself to is like they actually have proof in the market right now. And then you're going to attach that proof to the whole ecosystem, the whole narrative, and you're going to have access to much more capital. That's the differentiation between that one and Allbirds. they actually have something,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? They're actually good at what they do, apparently. Now, will they win the long-term race? I don't know that, but they say, I'll just play the devil's advocate, never doubt Elon, but especially in selling a narrative and raising capital.
Uh,
And Cursor could use that capital.
yeah, agree. I agree. So there was talk that Microsoft actually passed on a deal with Cursor to acquire them, and they passed on it right before Elon made his offer. Maybe they saw something they didn't like, or maybe Microsoft just didn't have the right kind of capital that Cursor would
Well,
send us to.
maybe they were using Copilot for advice. I don't know. Right? Like, so, or maybe they're just so confident in Copilot's abilities. Every time I ask corporate people about Copilot, let's just say they are not exactly effusive with their praise. Let's just say it that way.
I always like to point out when people drag Copilot that it is powered by GPT-4o and sometimes GPT-5 models. Just
So are
throwing
there
that out
like,
there.
are there corporate affairs forming that we don't know about if they're using 4.0?
Maybe. I mean, corporate affairs. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
very well could be. But yeah, I
Yeah.
just like to point that out that OpenAI is still behind Copilot. So drag Copilot all you want, especially if you're a Chat GPT user. It doesn't make any sense. It's all the same thing underneath the hood. I think. I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah.
I'm sure
Exactly.
Copilot is geared more towards enterprise. So it's probably lost some capabilities that GPT has, and it's probably gained some others. As far as
Well,
like knowing, about your company's North Star and documents, that type of thing.
I've been doing lots of customer interviews to see how corporates are actually using AI.
Hmm.
And Copilot's the name that comes up the most, like to their credit, but it's fascinating what they're using it for. They're using it for draft an email, right? To make a memo. So for these very like low value tasks for people, it makes them more productive. Like for you, yeah, okay, I'm not good at writing emails. This does a better job. They're not using it for, you know, designing agentic workflows, for example, where a lot of people think that's where actually all the value is. So it seems there's a lag in the adoption of AI to its greatest potential in corporate.
Yeah.
And maybe the problem is, to be fair to Copilot, that's not Copilot's problem. That's just that corporates don't know where to point the damn thing, right? So that would be the other side of the argument is that the people using Copilot, you know how we used to say in baseball, well, it's not the bat, it's the batter, right? So it's not the co-pilot, it's the pilot. That's the problem. So that could be the other side of the story is that people just simply don't know what to do with Copilot. Maybe it actually can do a lot more than what corporates are getting out of it. And it gets a bad name just because of that user error.
Yeah. So I know from my corporate experience that Copilot comes with Copilot Studio or Visual. It comes with an agentic programming side of it.
Yeah.
And in my case, it was locked down. Like you could get in there and do a couple things. Like I could make it. If I got an
Yeah.
email from a certain customer, I could have my agent ping me in Teams that, hey, Susan just emails you. You better look at it and respond. That was useful. But it's very basic functionality, something you could have done with
On your phone.
flags and filters before, like, right?
Yeah.
You didn't need an AI agent to do it, but they had all that locked down for us. So like I couldn't get in there, somebody who's actually capable, I couldn't get in there and make it use tools to my benefit, right? There was only certain people in the corporation, the company who could do it. And, it all goes back to liability and putting things out there that isn't tested and approved and all this kind of stuff. It's locked down. Now, I have heard of things where certain departments will have just a full day where they do nothing other than come up with ideas for AI to replace their jobs, essentially. So that sounds kind of cool, but then, those have to be reviewed and adopted. This is just why corporate is slow, is because everything has to be reviewed and adopted, but there's good reason for it. It's all down to liability. Who's going to pay for it if something screws up?
Not all. I mean, it's not always good. There are good reasons.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you probably have more AI safety boards than AI adoption right now.
Yeah.
More than the AI projects. And yeah, on the one hand, it's good to check the safety, the data privacy, etc. On the other hand, those things turn into political games. Like, who gets what projects? Does that project threaten my department? People are keenly aware that AI can displace their headcount underneath them.
Yeah.
Is that what you want if you're in a corporate? Not necessarily, because that's your power base. So there's a lot of, political games, shell games going on in those AI safety boards. And if you're trying to sell into enterprise, that just makes the sales cycle way longer than it otherwise would have to be. And that's just the first pass. AI safety board, then you're going to get an IT review, then you're going to get a legal review. And that's even before you get to the SLA part, like what you're actually trying to sell.
Yeah.
Like that's just the, reviewing, doing due diligence on the technology and the safety. So that's the world that people live in. And so when you're out there bashing corporate people for not being innovative with AI, that's their operating environment. It's not that they're not wanting to do stuff with it often. It's that they're just not even allowed to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to come down to there's going to be somebody with a sales specific AI. Maybe it's Salesforce, but there's going to be somebody with a sales specific AI or a customer success centric AI, and they're going to buy it from a third party because that third party is going to assume liability and et cetera, et cetera. They've had certifications or whatever. Yeah. That's probably the way it's going to end up working versus in-house brewing at large scale. That's at least my take on it anyways.
Hey, you've just watched a clip from Show Your Priors podcast. We hope you liked it. Check out our main channel for full episodes. We're also anywhere podcasts are found. Give us a like, subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything, but helps us out a ton. We'll see you back next week.